I'm so glad you paid it off, Maisie said, running her fingers along the edge of my kitchen counter like it already belonged to her. Now we can finally move in. It's family property, after all. I stared at her. The warmth in my coffee cup suddenly distant. Declan stood just behind her, arms folded, eyes not meeting mine. Excuse me, I said slowly. She gave a rehearsed little smile. You're living here alone. We thought it made sense. The kids need a yard. And this space, well, it was always meant for family. This house. I'd scraped through 23 years of overtime shifts, frozen pipes, missed vacations, and nights when I warmed up dinner with a coat still on my back because I couldn't afford both heat and groceries. I'd finished paying the final mortgage payment just 2 weeks ago. Alone. Quietly. And by we, I asked, keeping my voice even. You mean you two? Maisie nodded without hesitation. Declan and I have talked about it. A lot. You always said this place would stay in the family. I looked at Declan, my son, my only child. He didn't flinch. It's just logical, Mom. Logical. That word hit harder than it should have, as if logic erased memory, as if logic carried groceries or rocked a feverish baby at 2 a.m., or laid tile on a torn-up kitchen floor after your husband walked out. You never asked, I said, placing my mug down carefully. Not once. Maisie leaned against the fridge. We didn't think we had to. That's what family does, right, Shares? I looked at her, then at him, and I understood, maybe not for the first time, but certainly the clearest, this wasn't about need. It was about assumption. They assumed I was done. They assumed I'd step aside. They assumed the house I built with my back and bones was just waiting for someone else to take. Well, I said, finally, I think we see things very differently. Maisie's smile didn't fade, but Declan's eyes narrowed just slightly. I knew then that this was just the opening move. The weekend before the bomb dropped, I'd hosted a small dinner, just family, just us. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes with real cream, and baked a fresh cobbler, even though I was too tired to eat it myself. I'd picked up a bottle of red I'd been saving and tucked a little card next to each plate. This house is finally mine. I'd expected smiles, a toast, maybe even a simple, "You did it." Maisie stared at the card like it offended her. She didn't clap. Declan barely acknowledged it, kept checking his phone through most of dinner. I mean, congratulations, Maisie muttered eventually, not bothering to make eye contact. But think of the kids. A backyard like this? It's kind of wasted on one person, don't you think? The words didn't sting then. Not really. I thought it was just her being her blunt, a little tactless. I poured her another glass of wine, brushed it off with a smile, and told myself the silence was simply awkwardness. But now I saw it clearly. That wasn't awkwardness. It was calculation. That night, as she packed the boys' jackets and Declan brought in the empty dessert plates, Maisie turned at the door. "You should start boxing things," she said lightly. "This place'll need decluttering." I remember standing in the doorway, dish towel still in my hand, staring after them as they walked to the car. Declan didn't say goodbye. Maisie didn't wave. I had thought, maybe foolishly, that finally owning this house free and clear would bring a moment of peace. A breath. A sense that my sacrifices had not only built something, but kept something safe. Instead, I felt like I'd just announced my vulnerability. They weren't happy for me. They were circling, and I had been too proud or too tired to notice the teeth behind their smiles. But I wasn't tired anymore. If they were going to treat this house like a prize, they were about to learn, I don't give up what I've built. Not without a fight. That night, after Declan and Maisie dropped their little bomb, I called my sister Corinne. She and I weren't especially close, but I needed someone outside this twisted little bubble. Someone who might just say, "That's insane." Instead, she sighed. "Maybe they're just stressed. Maybe they're hoping you'll offer." I didn't offer. I would never. I know, I'm just saying. Things are tight for them. The next morning my phone rang again. This time it was Cousin Bev. Someone I hadn't spoken to since the last funeral. Hey, I just wanted to say maybe be gentle with Declan. It's tough raising kids these days. By noon, it was my niece. Then Corinne again. Same script. They just want stability. They're thinking about the kids. They said you once offered to let them move in remember. No, I didn't remember. Because it was a lie. I'd once said they could visit whenever they liked. That's not the same as handing over keys. By Sunday, it wasn't just phone calls, it was messages, texts, voicemails, a parade of guilt. You're being selfish? They have nowhere to go. You're punishing the boys for something that isn't their fault. Even my older brother chimed in. You're punishing your grandkids. Not fair, Eloina. Not fair. I'd babysat those boys every other Saturday since they were in diapers. I'd bought Maisie's prenatal vitamins when they couldn't afford them. Helped with rent when Declan lost his job twice. I'd kept my mouth shut when they parked their dented SUV in my driveway and ate my food like it was theirs. And now, for saying nothing, for drawing a line, I was the villain. My silence wasn't cruelty. It was dignity. But maybe that's why they'd felt so bold. People think if you're quiet, you'll always stay that way. They see you with your coffee and your quiet garden and your calm tone, and they think they can raise their voice over yours, take your space, rewrite your intentions. They forget sometimes the quiet ones are just watching, waiting. And I'd just begun. Monday morning, I opened the front door to grab the paper and nearly tripped over Maisie. She was on my porch swing legs, crossed a mug of coffee in hand like she'd brewed it in my kitchen. She didn't even flinch. Morning, she chirped. I thought we'd go over bedroom assignments while the layout's still fresh in my mind. I blinked, half wondering if I was dreaming. Then I laughed. Really laughed, sharp and short. You're joking. She stood slowly like she was unfurling something dangerous. Her voice dropped to that syrupy register she used when she wanted something. I'm just saying, if you don't want to hand over the house while you're alive, that's your choice. I narrowed my eyes. She smiled. But Declan is your only child. You won't live forever. My blood went cold. What are you saying, Maisie? She shrugged. Just that sooner or later everything you have will be his, which means ours. So why not start now? Make the transition easy. It wasn't just arrogance. It wasn't even entitlement. It was a quiet threat wrapped in a cashmere grin. I stepped back slowly like distance could dull the sting. She thought she could scare me, corner me, count down the years until she got the title. Well, she'd have to wait a lot longer than she expected. I didn't respond. I didn't yell. I just turned around, walked inside, and picked up the phone. Not to call Declan, not to call Corinne. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months, someone I trusted with more than just gossip. Someone who knew how to help people like me protect what was already theirs. By the time I hung up, I knew exactly what my next step would be. No more slow simmering silence. No more hoping it would blow over. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. On paper, in ink, under seal. Friday afternoon. I was in the side yard pruning the last of the begonias when the crunch of tires on gravel made me freeze. I turned my head. A moving truck. I dropped the shears without thinking. Declan stepped out of the passenger side. Maisie followed, with sunglasses on and a clipboard in her hand. The kids trailed behind, dragging backpacks. We told you we were moving in, Declan said, not even pretending it was a surprise. No, I replied, voice steady. Maisie scoffed. You didn't say no loud enough, and you didn't change the locks. With that, she snapped her fingers toward the movers. They rolled open the truck's rear and began unloading boxes like it was any other relocation. A mattress was leaned against the mailbox. Plastic tubs sat stacked 2 deep on my walkway. A high chair was dragged onto the porch. I stood still, hands shaking, not from fear, but from the audacity of it all. Maisie handed me a thick packet titled Family Property Cohabitation Agreement. She smiled, as if she'd just passed me a birthday card. I printed 2 copies, she said. One for us, one for you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch the paper. I turned on my heel, walked through my front door and locked it behind me. Then I picked up the phone and called Officer Renee Ferris, someone I'd taught Sunday school, with someone who'd once helped me report copper theft from the tool shed. She picked up on the second ring. Elowena, I need you to come by, I said. I have trespassers. I have a truck on my lawn. I have people unloading furniture into a home that isn't theirs. Renee was quiet for a beat. On my way, she said. I hung up. Outside, Maisie shouted something about just being reasonable, as if dragging a couch onto someone's porch was part of a polite conversation. I watched from the window as one of the movers rolled his eyes. Then I saw the patrol car turn onto my street. They left that night after Officer Ferris calmly but firmly told them to vacate the premises or risk arrest. Declan muttered something under his breath, but it was Maisie who leaned in as she walked past me. You'll regret this, she hissed. I didn't respond. But the next morning, when I opened the front door, my breath caught. Bright blue paint had been smeared in wide strokes across the white siding of my house. Letters too crude to ignore, too vulgar to repeat. The garage door bore slurs in dripping black spray paint. Beneath it, the chalk drawings my nieces and nephews had made 2 weekends ago. Flowers, sons a smiling stick figure labeled Aunt L were ruined. Crimson paint slashed through them like a wound. The wooden fence I'd spent an entire spring building each plank, sanded each nail placed by hand, was splattered in uneven strokes of garish green. I didn't cry. I walked back inside, retrieved my phone, and took photos of everything. Then I checked the security footage from the camera by the front door. There they were. Marcus Maisie in the dark, laughing, spray cans in hand, faces full of smug satisfaction. I didn't call Declan. I called Myra Dale, my attorney for the last 6 years. She'd handled my land boundary dispute and helped me finalize my will. She picked up warm but direct. Elowena, I have footage, I said, of vandalism. I'd like to pursue charges. And I'd like to discuss the trust clauses. Come in at 10, she replied. Bring everything. I did. By the time I walked out of her office, I had a plan. A sealed manila envelope and a date on the calendar circled in red. It was time they learned what family property really meant. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just showed up at my older brother Marcus's house for Sunday dinner, the same house where we used to gather every summer. Corinne opened the door startled. Her smile was practiced the kind people wear when they're unsure if a storm's about to start. Elowena, she said, stepping aside. We weren't expecting you. I know I said walking in. Smells like roast. The dining room was full. Declan and Maisie were already seated flanked by Marcus Corinne, their twin girls Aunt Vella from Cincinnati, and Travis, the ever-present house guest, who somehow made himself look official without ever helping with dishes. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, folded my napkin, and said nothing. I passed the rolls. Ate my potatoes. Nodded politely when someone brought up Uncle Glenn's terrible boat. I laughed in all the right places. No one asked why I'd come. No one dared. But I waited. Waited until the pie came out and the kids were ushered into the living room with cartoons. I took one last sip of lukewarm coffee, then pulled my phone from my purse. I pressed play and set it on the table beside the dessert. Let's all watch something, I said. At first silence, then gasps. The footage rolled Maisie and Marcus in my yard spray cans, in hand, their laughter echoing faintly. The slurs, the paint, the fence. Corinne covered her mouth. My brother didn't blink. There must be some misunderstanding, Marcus finally said. No, I answered calmly. There was no misunderstanding. Only intention. Maisie stood abruptly and left the room. Her fork clattered on her plate. Declan didn't follow her. He didn't say a word, just stared down at the pie like it might rescue him. No one looked at me. I stood, folded my napkin, and placed it neatly by my untouched slice of pecan. I brought copies for everyone, I said, sliding 3 USB drives across the table. One for Corinne, one for Marcus, and one for the police, if this goes any further. I didn't slam the door behind me when I left. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. They stayed quiet for 3 days. Then came a text from Declan. We can talk this out. No police. A few hours later, Maisie, you embarrassed us. This wasn't necessary. I didn't reply to either. Instead, I forwarded both messages to Myra, my lawyer. She responded with one word. Noted. By the end of the week, an envelope arrived on my porch, white crisp, with the letterhead of their attorney, printed in pretentious serif. Inside a notarized letter demanding Thule $800 for emotional distress and public defamation. 10 days to respond. Or they'd sue. I laughed. I scanned the letter, attached the footage again, and sent everything back to Myra. She drafted a response with such precision, it felt like a scalpel, polite, factual, devastating. I didn't have to deliver it. Officer Renee Ferris did. She rang their doorbell the next morning, the official response in hand. Proof of property damage. Proof of trespassing. Notice that we had no intention of paying, and instead were reviewing charges. I wasn't there, but I imagined Maisie's face when she opened the door. I imagined her flinch when Renee handed over the envelope. The same woman who once smiled too sweetly at potlucks, now staring down a uniformed officer on her porch. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I went to the backyard, rolled up my sleeves, and dug out the space for 2 new flower beds, poppies and salvia. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to reclaim the ground. Then I repainted the fence white again, smooth again, not because I had to, because they didn't win. They'd tried to intimidate me into silence. Now they were the ones scrambling. When you've spent your life keeping peace, people assume you'll keep doing it forever. They don't expect you to hold a line. They don't expect you to push back. But I had learned something over the last week. Peace doesn't mean surrender. And silence doesn't mean weakness. I still had one more envelope to deliver. Exactly 9 days later, the money appeared in my account. $2,800. No note, no apology, no message, just silence. I stared at the notification for a long moment, then closed the app. There was nothing left to say. I blocked both of their numbers. No calls, no texts, no middle of the night pleas masked as guilt. I closed the front gate literally, bought a new chain and lock, welded the hinges, and posted a sign, no trespassing. Private property. That weekend I dragged out the ladder and climbed it myself. Roller in one hand, paint can in the other. I covered the slurs and streaks. Every inch of blue, every drop of insult gone. Not with white. Cobalt gray. A color I'd picked not for forgiveness, but for boldness. It wasn't about the siding. It was about reclaiming something. They had tried to humiliate me, dismantle what I'd built, steal a home they never sacrificed for, but they hadn't won, and I hadn't broken. I'd done it all, every tile, every repair, every single mortgage payment on my own. They may have tried to claim the story, but they weren't in the pages, not the real ones. A few days later, Ruth from across the street mentioned that Declan and Maisie had moved in with her cousin, 3 kids, squeezed into a 2-bedroom rental with peeling wallpaper and no backyard. They say you were cruel, Ruth said, cautiously, as if it might sting. I smiled. Let them. Let them tell their version. Let them cry about injustice. Let them shape themselves into martyrs for anyone who'll listen. I wouldn't stop them, but I wouldn't play along. I had my version, I had truth. And I had a new coat of cobalt paint drying in the afternoon sun, stubborn, quiet, unyielding. They'd wanted to turn my home into a shared inheritance. Instead, I made sure it stood as a monument to something else, something they couldn't touch. This morning, I drank my coffee on the porch. The sky was still a little hazy, the kind that turns gold before it brightens. The air was crisp. September had finally settled in. There were no grandkids yelling, no Declan's car engine rumbling up the driveway, no Maisie's voice slicing through the morning with some new demand. Just the soft chirp of sparrows and the quiet shift of leaves in the breeze. Peace. I cradled the mug in my hands and looked out at the fence. The cobalt gray had cured beautifully, bold without being loud, sturdy, clear. A woman I'd seen before dark hair walks her dog every morning slowed as she passed. She glanced at the fence, then at me. "Looks good," she said. "Strong." I smiled, not rising from my seat. "Thanks. It needed to be." She nodded, then kept walking the leash loose in her hand, the dog sniffing the base of the mailbox across the street. I turned back toward the house and let the quiet settle over me again. That fence wasn't just wood. It was a boundary. It was a choice. It was the thing that stood between me and every person who ever thought I owed them more than I had. It was a message. Kindness is not an invitation, and generosity is not surrender. I had built that fence myself twice. Once for beauty, the second time for strength. It would last longer this time. Everything they tried to take had only reminded me what I'd earned. Every insult, every painted wall, every legal threat had been a mirror showing me who I was and who they had never been. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need a reconciliation dinner or a family vote or a call from someone finally realizing I was right. I just needed this: coffee, a crisp morning, and the sound of sparrows undisturbed.